wired into technology transformation, this is the Digital Bulletin podcast. Hello everybody, welcome to episode 28 of the Digital Bulletin podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Each month we assemble a group of experts to debate important issues and topics from the world of technology. For this edition, we are tackling the gaming industry and the influence of big tech in the wake of Microsoft's agreed $68.7 billion acquisition of Call of Duty maker Activision Blizzard. Patrick McFadin, Ava Rez and Michael Metzger, who will introduce themselves shortly, talk about consolidation in the gaming industry, the cloudification of gaming, and what this all means for the onset of the metaverse. Listen, learn, and enjoy. Thank you very much for joining us for this latest episode of the Digital Bulletin podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by a new panel of guests to discuss the convergence of the tech and gaming industries and that very crazy world right now. Let's get straight to it. And we're going to ask the guests, first of all, to introduce themselves. We'll start with you, Patrick.
Hi, I'm Patrick McFadin. I work at DataStax, primarily on developer programs and on one of our very favorite open source projects, Apache Cassandra. I've been in the Apache Cassandra project for over 10 years now, and work with other Apache projects like Pulsar, etc. But yeah.
Great, thanks, Patrick. Ava Rez, maybe introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, this is Ava, and I'm an investment manager at Edge Investments. We focus on the creative sector, invest mainly late seed Series A stages. Before joining Edge, I used to work at Sky in the startup investments team, also focusing on the creative space, including gaming, esports, and metaverse, which I'm also doing in the current role. And I've been in VC for 8 years.
Brilliant. Thank you for coming on, Ava. And last, but very much not least, Michael Metzger. Michael, hello.
Hi, this is Michael. I'm a partner at Drakestar Partners, global media and technology investment bank. I have about 100 folks across the US, Europe, and Asia. And we advise media and tech companies on mergers and acquisitions, as well as growth stage financings. And I've been focusing specifically on the digital media and the gaming segment.
Great. Well, thank you again for all coming on to the pod, and we're hoping to have a really interesting discussion today about the gaming industry and the direction it's going in, and the role big companies like Microsoft are playing in it. Michael, you mentioned there you advise on mergers and acquisitions. Now, acquisitions don't get much bigger than Microsoft buying Activision Blizzard, or attempting to at the moment. We're still in going through the regulatory process, but the $68.7 billion deal was announced in January. We'll come to you first, Patrick. What were your initial thoughts when you heard about that deal?
My first thought was, is that ever going to happen? It almost seems too big. It just brings a lot of concern that I have about like too much consolidation. I think there's the fun and innovative part of the gaming industry is these, I think are the small gaming shops, the 5-person studios that do really cool things. And I just get worried, because look at Wordle, that just came out of nowhere. That was one guy. And when I see these large acquisitions, I think, man, we're going to get stuck in an innovator's dilemma if we're not careful. But, I'm not a regulatory person. I just worry about the gaming industry in general.
Ava, we'll come to you. I mean, what were your thoughts? Do you share Patrick's concerns about that? Or, on the investment side, do you understand why Microsoft are putting so much cash into this?
Yeah, definitely. I have a couple of thoughts on that. So obviously there's a consolidation going in the gaming sector. And for us, actually, it's also exciting because we work with startups and it's a potential exit route for startups. But what I see really is that the gaming industry is a very exciting industry. It's currently a $180 billion market, but it's still just the fourth of the video market, which is around $650 billion. So I think there's a lot of headroom here, and that's why big tech companies are so excited about the space. Also, I think there's a lot of competition around content, acquiring content, and the gaming sector gives you the opportunity to either create new IP or to create content around existing IP. So that's where I also see that there's a lot of potential for companies to do that and kind of get a better position on the market. And I think the third point is really that with gaming, you can create very valuable franchises. So it's not just about the content that you can create. So if you think about Netflix, they are creating content with 12,000 employees. They pour $20 billion per year into content, while let's say Fortnite created content with like originally with 2025 developers, currently $4 billion in revenue and 70 million monthly active users. So there is a lot of potential in gaming. You can create a whole ecosystem around gaming. You can collect data on your players. You can create events, merchandising. So I think there's much more to gaming and then acquiring content. And obviously, we live the era of subscriptions with Apple having subscriptions for movies, games, fitness, and music, and other players do the same. So I see that there are a lot of very attractive points in the gaming sector, and that's why probably this is happening now.
Michael, coming to you, do you share those thoughts that Ava has put forward there, or were you still kind of surprised by this eye-watering number that Microsoft is putting down for Activision Blizzard?
Yeah, I do share the thoughts. The number is still, obviously massive. Mm-hmm. So from my view, also on a high level, kind of gaming is kind of the largest segment within entertainment, larger than any other. So companies spending a lot of time in it and trying to get a mind share of that totally makes sense. Second, really the consolidation. It's not that it just happened this year. This was just a big deal this year. So we kind of track what's happening in the gaming M&A space, the IPOs, the financings for private and public companies. And just to put that into perspective, in 2020, we saw a little bit more than 30 billion worth of deals. That exploded in 2021 to 85 billion in overall deals. And obviously with the Microsoft Activision deal happening in January, as well as the Take-Two Zynga deal, we already exceeded kind of the 85 what we had all of last year in January. And we're predicting that in 2022, we'll see an overall deal value of about 150 billion all in. So that's kind of a general market. And regarding Activision, it was not totally surprising. There's been rumors that there's going to, Activision to be acquired for years. I mean, Disney was a hot candidate for many years. And from Microsoft's point, the stock in Activision has dropped a lot compared to the peak earlier last year. So from that perspective, you can argue they're actually buying Activision at a discount. And then there were also all the internal problems within the company. And my understanding is the deal actually got started with Bobby reaching out to Phil Spencer at Microsoft and, looking to explore a deal and also to some extent find a good exit for Activision overall.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, some really insightful figures there from Michael on the growth of investment in gaming. Does that kind of reflect the growth of the gaming industry itself? It's a very different industry now to even what it was 5 years ago, isn't it, in terms of the diversification? Just the sheer amount of money floating around in this industry. Maybe can you give the listener a bit of insight into how that industry has changed so much?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I work a lot with independent game companies, independent makers. It's easy for one person, two people, three people to create a blockbuster game. Like I've mentioned Wordle before. And that's probably my primary concern is it stifles that kind of innovation if there's just no room for them. And this is just, I live in Silicon Valley. We live and die on the small startup that roars, and I don't want to see the gaming industry get into a place where they just don't have any room for innovation, because that's what's going to make it grow. And there's ways to make that happen, but what's I think really fascinating to me is how mobile has changed gaming. How it used to just be the $1 billion events like Call of Duty launch. Now it's a lot more of the mobile space is really interesting. If you look at just casual gaming, how it's exploded so much in the past few years, especially around the pandemic. But there's just a lot of accessible technology to make that work too. We're giving people the ability to do more with less. Cloud has brought a lot of equity to tech startups, so they don't have to have a huge startup budget. They can get going faster, and I hope that keeps fueling into the future, especially as we start getting into really interesting things like VR and AR, which are emerging. I'm going to call that. It's starting. I mean, I've used an Oculus. It's pretty cool. So, but it's got a lot of room to grow. But this is the kind of thing that I think about a lot, especially around technology, is like, we've got to keep the accessibility there. We have to make it mobile. We have to, not mobile gaming, but we have to keep things moving in technology so that if someone wants to quit their day job to go create a gaming startup, they have the ability to do that.
Ava, have you got any further thoughts on what Patrick said there about the industry itself?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point. So I've been looking at cloud gaming for a while. There are obviously the big players, but I think what is a real challenge there still is the unit economics of cloud gaming. Although I do see the value of cloud gaming or more hybrid solutions there, with some edge components where this can democratize the gaming industry. So I do agree on that point. I also think that it's really important that there will be kind of a de-risking of the gaming industry, because currently 5% of the games make money. So I think the monetization is still not solved. So we moved from a pay-to-play to a free-to-play model, although a lot of people thought that was not going to work. Now it's working. And I think, and I guess we'll get to the metaverse point, but I think with the play-to-earn model, I think it's a very exciting point whether that will be viable, because that can create value for the creators, the game developers themselves. And I think the de-risking of the game industry, the monetization, how you can make these smaller studios profitable, I think that's the real challenge. And that's where I would be really keen to see some good examples and some solutions.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Michael, I'm keen to get your thoughts on why you think Microsoft have gone down this route. Obviously, they are a company not without gaming heritage with Xbox and everything like that. But what do you think their play is here with this acquisition, when you consider their bigger position in the technology industry? We've spoken about cloud a lot. Obviously, Microsoft has a very strong position in the public cloud market. What do you think they're ultimately trying to achieve with this?
Yeah, so first of all, discussions have happened, I think, for many years, and this was a very opportunistic time for Microsoft to come in at, as I mentioned before, maybe a discount to where Activision was trading before, and capture, one of the best IPs and most profitable IPs in the gaming space. So that was probably a key driver. Another key initiative within Microsoft is kind of build up the subscription base for the Xbox Game Pass service. I think they currently have about 25 million subscribers, and with Activision's coming in with 400 million monthly active users, they thought, if that's being put, or a portion of that being put on Game Pass, that could probably help build up the subscription service significantly, and make sure it's not going on any other platforms, maybe what Sony or some other entities are doing. And medium to long term, I agree, while cloud gaming, I think, will take still several years to really be more popular. And there have been a lot of early initiatives, obviously. over time, I guess the importance of the hardware component, whether that's an Xbox or a PlayStation, I think will get smaller and smaller. And in 10 years from now, I'm pretty sure we might not have kind of the gaming hardware anymore. And from that point of view, just building up a subscription service that could really be consumed in almost any device, I think that was one of the drivers on the Microsoft side as well. One additional quick comment on kind of the gaming industry at all and what does consolidation do. One thing to also to consider is there has been a tremendous amount of money flowing into the industry in startups, meaning private companies that are raising money. And in Q4 last year, for example, was the highest amount of startups in gaming being funded. There were over 200 financing rounds announced for raising about a little bit more than 4 billion. And all this kind of money flowing in it's kind of building a whole new ecosystem of, we call it future unicorns. As the industry is to some extent hit driven, it's always not easy to predict which one of those 200 companies that got funding just in last quarter is going to have an amazing hit, but a certain number of them will. So with all this money flowing into the industry, we're kind of building the next major gaming companies of the future. And to me personally, that's super exciting.
Find us as Digital Bulletin on LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram, and at Digi_Bulletin on Twitter.
You know, the foundation of the industry is that startup ecosystem and people being able to develop games at the drop of a hat. Ava, have you got any thoughts on the Microsoft deal and how, you know, further consolidation might impact that? Or do you think there is still going to be an ecosystem where that is possible despite that consolidation? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Ava.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. So obviously at Edge, we are definitely looking at rising stars, and I'm personally very excited to see game studios, but also I think for me the underlying technology that can facilitate the future of gaming and the future of the metaverse, although this is a very used term at the moment, but I think that's where I see value at the moment. So I think content is really important, and experiences, applications will be really important. But right now, as an investor, I would put my bet mainly on the underlying technology that can facilitate the reach of global audiences and collaboration between creators and artists and gamers. And I think we can then get to the socializing aspect and the multiplayer aspect, which I think is really important. And obviously the pandemic showed us this, but I think this trend, even if there is a slight decline in the growth rate, I think this trend continues. So for me, the underlying technologies that can help to go on with that, whether it's computing power, network capabilities, that's really important. But then also basically the content that will be created on top of it, and how you can create these immersive experiences where people can socialize and come together. I think that will be a really exciting point. And then the last bit is really the cross-platform bit. So I think with this consolidation, there is a risk that the cross-platform nature of games, I mean, it's already a problem for many games. So I think that can kind of disappear. And I think gamers would like to have this experience with their friends, with their buddies across different platforms. So the cross-platform aspect is definitely something that should stay. And I think even Microsoft is doing that with their Game Pass.
Yeah. Patrick, coming from the tech industry yourself, have you got any thoughts on that underlying tech piece, the cloudification of gaming, and also what Ava mentioned there about, cross-platforming and how that's going to develop?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because just this week, Google announced that they're going to pause, the Stadia stuff. And which makes a lot of sense, I think, because nobody who's in technology is understands how they're solving the magical problem of latency. If you talk to any hardcore gamer, my 13-year-old son talks about latency like he knows what it is, and because that's the most important thing, especially with fast switch games, which are really, those are the big blockbusters, right? The Call of Duties, and if you look at what cloud gaming delivers, it's centralization of the technology. So you don't have to ship or not ship a PlayStation 5. Look at what happened in the past 2 years with the Xbox and PlayStation console shortage. It caused this ridiculous effect in the market, because now everyone, it's like the scarcity. So okay, we'll solve scarcity with abundance by just putting everything in the cloud, but we still have this underlying problem, is getting bits from that last mile. It puts a lot of latency on there. So most gamers, when they, if you think about the people who are actually spending the most amount of money on gaming, they roll their eyes when you talk about cloud gaming. They still want a local experience. So, but the consolidation is interesting, because now you're talking about consolidating an experience around, say, the Xbox. The Xbox is not just a console anymore. It's also an online presence. Origin, Steam. I mean, let's be terrified here for a minute. Who's going to acquire Steam? And it's not going to be Microsoft, I don't think, because I don't think Gabe Newell wants to go back to Microsoft. But Steam owns a lot of the market and is starting to pick up a lot of, for lack of a better word, steam around VR too. I mean, that's one of their biggest. That's their fastest growing segment in Steam is VR. So, yeah, I mean, I look at like the cloud gaming and technology centralization is still going to be mitigated by the companies that help deliver that last mile. And right now it's to a device, a gaming PC, a console.
What impact then, Patrick, do you think that will ultimately have on the metaverse? Let's broach that topic, and you're talking about AR, VR, the introduction of those technologies into gaming and the further development of those technologies as well. If we're still struggling to get the underlying technology in place, when do you think we're going to be embracing what our dear tech leaders have called the metaverse? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I think there's a lot of excitement and delusion, which is fun. Like, oh my God, Facebook is going to own everything. No, they're not. Gaming comes and goes. I mean, Roblox was the hot kid on the block. Now it's getting like completely burned down. It's like the toxic company now. So I predict within a year, Roblox is going to be a disaster area. So when Facebook says we're going to own the metaverse, there's a whole lot of companies out there like PlayStation, like Sony. They're going to be hold my beer. I'm waiting for that moment. So because it's just so ready for disruption. The Oculus is an amazing device. It's basically a Snapdragon on your face, which is great. But there are so many, if you look at what's happening in that industry, there's so much room for innovation that I just stand by. It's going to be a lot of fun for the next 5 years.
Ava, you've been looking into this, as you said at the beginning of the pod. Like, what thoughts have you got to add to what Patrick has said there?
Yeah, so I think this consolidation is happening, but I do believe that the true metaverse is not going to be basically a bunch of franchises or separated universes. I think it should be a platform where you have the interoperability, where you can, as a user, as a player, you can kind of go between different universes, and you can take your identity, your digital assets, your avatar, whatever you have, and basically you can take these experiences and these assets with you from one universe to the other. So I think that's where it's really interesting, that why this consolidation is happening. On the other hand, I see that the metaverse is going into the other direction. Now, how these two will come together, I'm not sure. But for us at Edge, I think what is really exciting is really that the metaverse covers a lot of areas that we cover ourselves. So it's basically, to me, it's the intersection of gaming, immersive experiences, education. So I think it's not just about, obviously it's about having fun, socializing, but for instance, there are so many other opportunities there in terms of, let's say, VR trainings, education, in the virtual space, how you can then reach global audiences, how you can kind of facilitate interactions between people who would have never met otherwise. So I think this interoperability piece will be really crucial if we want to create a real metaverse. And right now, what I do think the first step is really to create the building blocks of the metaverse, and that's where we get back to the underlying technology, cloud or cloud computing, hybrid solutions, computing power, network, and so on.
Michael, do you see a similar picture from a Drakestar perspective?
Yeah, so the metaverse, everybody talks about the metaverse, but probably everybody has something else in mind. When I hear the metaverse, what comes to mind to me is Ready Player One. Kind of you essentially live in a different world, more or less, having some VR goggles on, and that's probably what Facebook or Meta, Oculus goal is, to create something like that. But I also think it's going to take many years to get there. But then there are also different versions of a metaverse. One thing I think is interesting, for example, what Niantic is doing. Niantic, they're the one who came up with the Pokemon Go.
Yeah. And
essentially it's a AR app on your phone. It's kind of a real world metaverse where you can walk around, you meet people, you actually see their avatars on your AR device, you walk by stores, they can advertise things, or you're essentially living in the real world, but it's kind of a parallel world next to it that offers all kind of opportunities. And another version of, in my mind, a metaverse is what, for example, Animoca is doing with Sandbox. That's essentially a virtual world where people buy land, they buy goods, cars, boats, all this kind of stuff, can interact, get together, chat, meet, and all of those have massive growth potential. And I think for the years to come, there's all kind of going to be different pockets of a metaverse. That's at least my view.
Yeah. What do you think about what pocket will the gaming industry occupy? Do you think it will sort of be, across all of those different technologies and, AR, VR?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at what Oculus doing, gaming is a big component, besides the experimental piece like concerts and just meeting with people. What Niantic is doing, I mean, it's to me, it's kind of a real world game where you go out and hunt certain things, collect items, and so on. And very, very much also with what Sandbox is doing. They have games there, people are entertained. So I think gaming will be a core part of all of those.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're just about done, guys. Thank you all so much for coming on. I want to get your thoughts on one final topic, really, and that's the effect the pandemic has had on all of this stuff. Has the pandemic, Patrick, I'll come to you. Do you think the pandemic has accelerated our journey to the metaverse? Do you think we'd be where we are today with a lot of obviously the renaming of Facebook and the very public play that they've done, and Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard, and the gaming industry developing at such a speed? Do you think we are ahead of where we would have been if the pandemic hadn't have happened?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The pandemic broke us from this idea that you can't do things virtually. And I mean, my mom uses Zoom now. What's up with that? But I mean, it's perfectly reasonable to get onto a video call with somebody now like it's no big deal. And that's going to translate really, I think, really well into every bit. It normalizes things that we weren't making normal before. It used to be that video conferences were what tech companies did. Now every company does it. And metaverse, AR, VR, is just going to ride on the coattails of that. Like I said, the genie's out of the bottle. We broke everyone. It's like, oh, this is completely normal now. What's going to happen with conferences? What's going to happen with, face-to-face customer meetings? It's all changed. And now we just have to catch up with some technology to make it a little less intrusive or hard to work with, like my audio doesn't work, things like that. We've got some challenges ahead of us, but I think we'll make it work, and it'll change the whole world again.
Yeah. Ava, do you agree with Patrick, or do you think that the big tech companies are kind of on this path anyway?
No, I do agree. I think this pandemic accelerated this kind of growth, which is great for the creative sector. I think obviously not the pandemic, but the side effect of it. And as I said, there are many good causes where this new metaverse or virtual environment can be really beneficial. So, for instance, as I said, VR trainings is a good example where you can basically educate people in all over the globe or across different countries. You can bring people together and they can socialize in this environment. So I think there are many benefits from this aspect, and obviously that reduces traveling costs, and you can do these things in a more cost efficient way. So I do see the value in that, but I do share the view of Michael that I think the metaverse will probably start with the more like digital, physical, virtual, physical kind of word or blended word, because as Niantic is a good example, I think that's my view, that this will not happen from one day to another. People still want to meet in person, and I think especially for creators, I think that kind of serendipity is really important. But then what you can do in a virtual environment that can accelerate, for instance, the creation or the collaboration or reaching your audiences in new ways. But at the same time, I think there will be still physical basically gatherings or physical aspects of it. So I think it's going to be a transition to this, but yeah, the pandemic did accelerate the trend.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the real world we have is still quite nice, isn't it? Let's be honest. Michael, any closing thoughts on the pandemic point and how that's changed things? Obviously, the figures you gave earlier about investment into the gaming industry were not at all affected by it, by the looks of it.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. It definitely accelerated. It accelerated the consolidation. It also accelerated the investment getting into the business or into the gaming segment, and that's and that's really the growth driver for great things to come this year and next year and so on. So from that perspective, it also really increased the audience. People kind of playing, being on the mobile side as well as PC console, and some of those people to some extent got hooked and continue to want to play and explore new games and experiences.
A big thank you to Patrick McFadin, Ava Rez, and Michael Metzger for giving up their time for the Digital Bulletin podcast. I hope you enjoyed their insights, and it's certainly going to be interesting and fun to see how the tech and gaming industries continue to converge. Remember, if you want your fill of great interviews and thought leadership from the technology space, then head over to digitalbulletin.com and subscribe to the podcast too. The last thing for me to do is to thank you for sticking with us, listener. We hope you can tune in again next time. Goodbye.
That was the Digital Bulletin podcast. Listen and subscribe to a range of podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. Plug in for news, features and case studies on the very latest in enterprise technology and digital transformation.